So no discussion of the oil industry is complete without talking about prices. And we're going to look at oil prices in the modern times. And part of what I want you to see is what drives them, but also how booms and busts are an endemic part of all commodity businesses, and oil is no different. So the blue line is the oil price if it's normalized back to $21. The green price was the actual price at the time. But we're going to focus on the blue line. You can see that big things happened in the early 1970s. This is when OPEC started to flex its muscle. This is when some of Saudi Arabia and some of the other OPEC countries began to restrict exports to the United States and other parts of the world for political reasons. This spike is when when the Shah of Iran, when the Shah of Iran fell, and Ayatollah Khomeini brought in the new, more Islamist government into Iran. And you see over time in the early 1980s, people realized, okay, we're going to get back to business as normal. And then the price just kind of settled in this 20 to basically 20 to $40 range for a long time. This was a terrible time in the Texas industry because they were not making a lot of money. At that point, the easy wells had been drilled. And this is where a lot of Texans left the oil and gas business. You'll hear people who work in the industry talk about a lost decade, almost 2 decades where nobody got hired, nobody entered the industry, and it was here because of these oil prices. This little downturn right here was caused by an Asian economic downturn that reduced the demand for oil. And then you see in the 2000s, oil prices just begin to climb upward. And you can summarize that basically in one word: China. As China began to grow and modernize, it caused the world economy to boom. And as the world economy boomed, so did the price of oil. There was the Great Recession in 2008, 2009 that caused a very sharp drop in the price, but notice how quickly it recovered. But then you see in the 2014 timeframe, the price fell off of a cliff, and we were back into a much more moderate price of oil. This was driven more by oversupply and expectation that demand was not going to grow at the same rates perhaps as it has in the past. So we'll look at that in what drives the price of oil. And what you see is the price of oil is driven by a very close match in supply and demand. The demand of oil is relatively inelastic to the price. It takes wide swings in price to get people to change their consumption of energy and to change companies from producing the energy. You can see that the world consumption dipped dramatically in response to coronavirus. Now I say dramatically, but it only went from 100 million barrels a day down to 85 million barrels a day. So that was only a 15% reduction in demand. But what happened to the price? Well, it plummeted to the point where on one day, and this was a fluke of the trading markets in the United States, WTI traded at a negative value. And then you can see that over time, the consumption began to pick up, as did the production. And you can see down here the idea of, were we putting oil in to our stockpile, or were we pulling oil out of storage? So supply, demand, and I also include in there the idea of speculation. It's not just what's happening today with supply and demand, but what people think is going to happen in the future that drives the price of oil. Any good oil man, and I don't consider myself an oil man, I don't have the decades of experience they have, will tell you that the price of oil has always been cyclical, will always be cyclical, and you just learn to manage through that. Let's take a look into the bigger world market who's commanding this supply and demand of oil. Notice that we've had on the world stage the rise of the national oil companies, and in a sense these displaced the Seven Sisters. As these countries flexed their muscles, they started pushing out the Seven Sisters and their successors so that they can do things themselves. But a lot of these companies still contract with Western oil companies to bring in expertise and equipment as joint ventures. National oil companies control about 90% of the proven reserves, much like OPEC. And you can almost directly say it's OPEC plus China and Russia. Across the world, what's happened to the Seven Sisters and some other companies is there's been a tremendous amount of consolidation. So you can see today there are these companies, these 6 companies that are considered IOCs, and you'll hear different explanations of what that acronym stands for. Integrated, which means it controls more than one stream. All of these companies have midstream and or downstream operations, so that makes them integrated. Sometimes they say they're international, and in fact, all of these companies are international. And sometimes they're referred to as a super major instead of an IOC. But this is, if you will, big oil, and you can see how much consolidation there has been in the industry. In the United States, though, there's still a significant number of independent upstream companies. What's fun about this chart is you can update it based on the events of coronavirus and how things have changed. You can see that Chesapeake is now out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, but it was a major player until it went in. And then you also see companies like Noble that was purchased by Chevron in the wake of coronavirus. So these are the independent companies. They're, for the most part, publicly traded, the big ones. And they drill a lot of the wells onshore in the United States. Now, this is a little bit of a dated statistic, and I think that number's probably changed because the majors have gotten into the Permian Basin in a major way. Companies rely on service companies. One of the things you're going to see when we talk about drilling a well is you look at a well site and you see one well drilling operation. Great. There's often a dozen companies that are actually working on that well doing various things. So these are some of the major service companies. They're global service companies, but many of them headquartered in the United States. You can see, again, coronavirus was hard on some of them. BJ Services declared bankruptcy. These are the people that they don't own the rights. They don't develop. They don't go out and purchase the leases. They don't pump the money in to develop the well. They're just the people who help you drill the well. In fact, they will drill. In many cases, they will drill the well for you if you'll contract the whole thing to them. Now let's move to the other stream, the midstream companies. These tend to be pipeline companies. What I want you to see about this is you don't know any of their names. These are unknown companies to you. Now, in the energy industry, they're known, but they're not the sort of things that get on the tips of all of our tongues. These are considered to be the boring or the not sexy side of the energy industry. But over the course of the semester, you're going to see just how critical they are to the profitability of the energy industry. And then also, we have the major downstream companies. These are the refiners and the marketers. So you clearly know Valero, but you don't realize they're a refiner. You just know that you see their service stations. Marathon Oil is kind of a legacy, and Sunoco are legacies. But these are some major companies that are in the refining business and in the marketing business. Just want you to see their names. So when we come into class, we've set the stage to have a really good discussion about what's going on. We're going to familiarize ourselves with some very key developments in the oil and gas industry, and then we're going to see where we are as we are still on the tail end of the coronavirus conflict. Really look forward to a great class discussion.